Welcome to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm Dr. Kristin, an integrative holistic family physician, author of Life After Lyme, and host in this virtual space of learning, healing, and growing. I believe humans are like trees, and our physical limb is only one of many. Health on all limbs of the tree, emotional, conceptual, social, spiritual, is absolutely required for the whole tree that is you to be vibrantly well. I created the Healing Grove podcast as a place to showcase some of the world's best integrative and holistic medicine, to expose you to transformative tools and mindset shifts for all limbs of your tree. I hope you enjoy our conversation in the Healing Grove today as much as I enjoyed having it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Healing Grove podcast. I'm so excited to introduce to you my new friend, Heather Gray. Heather Gray is a certified functional diagnostic nutritionist and bioenergetic practitioner. She specializes in supporting people with complex and chronic illness, as do I. So we have a lot of overlap in our patient population: Lyme disease, mold toxicity, autoimmune, you name it. With over 32 years of personal experience, she understands the struggles that people who live with these things have, and she's dedicated to helping them find relief. She's an author, a speaker, a stand-up comedian, and wants to inspire, educate, and entertain others on their healing path. So I suspect we might have a little bit of entertainment in this conversation. What do you think, Heather?
No pressure, no pressure.
Listen, we won't find a better audience than the Healing Grove audience. These are like total love bugs listening for tips and tools and practices and mindset shifts from people who have, kind of come about them the hard way. So you've definitely earned that distinction. So we met kind of in these backwards ways through NIKKI, right? So I got all tapped into the NIKKI watch a few months ago and then found out that you're the one who does their podcast interviews. So tell me first about that whole thing. How did you get hooked up with NIKKI and what are you doing with them?
Gotta love the universe. So like I said, I've been a bioenergetic practitioner for quite some time, and I've worked with $10,000 machines, $20,000 machines. And, I found that they were really great at the diagnostic part, but they weren't great at moving the needle. And I've tried so many. And so all of a sudden I see the NIKKI start popping up in different like Lyme groups and stuff. And, at first when I saw the price, I was like $1,500. I'm like, there's no way in hell that works. Just, so completely dismissed it. And then it popped up again, and then it popped up again. And I kind of have a rule of threes where if something's coming at me 3 times, okay, God, universe, whatever, I'll listen. So then I started chasing him. And at the time he had a pretty good gatekeeper, and it was really hard to get to him. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. You want to be on my show. But I chased him down because I'm tenacious, and finally got him on my show. And as an entrepreneur, by definition, we don't ask to go work for other people, right? Like it's kind of like the death of our souls. But by the time I hit end record, I went, I don't know how or where, but you need to find a place for me in your organization. Like I hadn't even tried the product yet, but there was something about Stephen that I just instantly fell in love with. What I know of frequency, technology, it just made sense to me. And he goes, we feel the same way about you. I don't know where, let me figure it out. And a month later, they came back. Actually, it was a month later this month. It's been a year now that I've been their podcast host this month. And he came back and said, hey, how'd you like to be our podcast host? I'm like, I'm sorry, you want to pay me to do the thing I love to do the most? Yes, please.
Wow, that's such a great story. I love that. I think I heard you speak about it as like it violates the code of entrepreneurial business to like go to, so true, right? Like nobody wants their job, right? They just want their thing. So that's awesome that you listened to your soul and your heart and you jumped into that, even though it was like scary and not what you were looking for when you set out.
Yeah.
So speaking of not what we were looking for, like you're this whole amazing functional coach, practitioner person who's helping people recover from complex badness. And I want to know about that journey. And so do my listeners, I think. So give us a sense of where you were before that whole pivot and what's happened since.
So let's start at the beginning, shall we? I was basically born full of shit. Like how many, right? Can you relate to being constipated at a really young age? I was 4 years old, sitting on the potty so long that my feet would fall asleep. And that was kind of like my start to let's throw Band-Aids on symptoms journey, right? Let's give her laxatives and stool softeners and have her drink these thick, nasty oils. But nobody was asking why this 4-year-old couldn't poop. Hindsight's 2020. Turns out that was the same year my uncle committed suicide. That was the year my grandmother died of breast cancer, and I was being raised by alcoholic addicts. So needless to say, starts my, ACE, adverse childhood experiences. My ACE scores were already off, off the charts. So yay me, overachiever. So it kicked in my autoimmune disease as well, celiac, and I was eating the standard American diet, right? The SAD diet, didn't know any better. And so this is kind of what started me off as being a good host. It's like that's one thing that anybody can get from this. And I sing it to the top of to the mountain is you can't just focus on treatment. There's something that happened that put you in place 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years before you ever started getting that diagnosis. And so this is what was setting me up to be the perfect host. So a lot of early childhood trauma. I knew I was living in mold a few different times when I was younger. Celiac disease, and then when I finally got bit by a tick. My mom divorcing my dad for his brother when I was 13. That was fun. And then having her get pregnant. So I have sister cousins. I'm like, anybody else here have sister cousins? So it just set me up to be the perfect host. So when I got bit by a tick when I was 13, I had my first suicide attempt when I was 15. And again, nobody was asking, why is this 15-year-old trying to off herself? Let's, antipsychotics, antidepressants, mood stabilizers, called me attention seeking, pat me on my head and send me on my way. So that was basically I had 2 more suicide attempts after that, and 27 years total of undiagnosed Lyme disease, mold toxicity, mercury poisoning, parasites, 3 autoimmune diseases, and cavitations by the time everything was all said and done. I was a silly hairstylist at the time, 15 years, toxic environment, right? And I heard on a podcast, Reed Davis, the founder of FDN, speaking about how you can't focus on treatment. You need to make sure your gut is healed and that your hormones are balanced and that your detox pathways are open. And for some reason, intuitively, I was like, this is going to be what helps get me out. And I had to convince my ex-husband at the time, it was like a $1,200 course. I think it's like $8,000 now, to go through it. And when you go through it, you do a couple labs on yourself to be a guinea pig. And that's when I found out I also had blastocystis hominis, which is a common parasite, especially with people who have pets. It didn't matter what I ate. I would blow up like Violet from Willy Wonka in the chocolate factory. I always, expected Oompa Loompas to come out and roll me away. That's when I found out I had, hormones were in the tank, there was no gas in the tank. It was no wonder that I wasn't functioning. So that was the start of that journey for me.
Okay. So, there's a lot I want to say. First, I want to say my heart is aching for the trauma that you experienced. I mean, you say it with a lightness, and I know you're a stand-up comic, and so it's easy to sort of deflect that with humor, but I just want to honor that there's a lot. And I just want to say that I see you.
Oh, I'm still unpacking it. Like the Chiron effect. Have you read that book?
No. Oh, but Chiron, the wounded healer, or
Chiron? Yeah. Are you big in, do you believe in astrology?
I mean, yes.
Okay. So I'm reading it, and the wounded healer, Chiron, ends up where you're needing where you're most wounding is where it's located in the chart. And mine was neglect. And so I'm having her on my podcast in a few months. And so I'm reading her book and I'm going through it, and like all day yesterday. And the word that kept coming up was forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness. Like, I'm surprised my eyes look decent today because I spent yesterday curled up on the floor in the fetal position in tears, just moving through all this stuff, because you have to. The only way out is through. So that was another part of the journey that we haven't talked about yet, is like the somatic work and the nervous system work, the trauma work. As a good functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, I was great at taking the supplements and doing the diet and coffee enemas, but you wanted me to work on my trauma? Like, I'm sorry. Can you put that, can you explain that word in a sentence? Like, I didn't understand that all this stuff created trauma in my nervous system that I then was going to have to unpack and get my nervous system calmed down to the point where it could heal.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're so wise and insightful to know that now. And thank you for naming that. Because I think a lot of people will hear you, in listening to the story, you start out by talking about how you were the perfect host. And my mind instantly went to, well, podcast host. But what you meant right? You meant that you were the perfect kind of attractor for all these sort of lower vibration energies, like parasites, like mold, like Lyme, like your immune system not functioning to manage all that stuff, right? So when we're traumatized, the physiology just goes haywire and we can't actually process toxins. We can't actually kill infections. So that's what you meant. And I wanted to put a point on that because there's a lot there. And I think as people listen to all the different symptoms and diagnoses you racked up, it can be hard to kind of, people are trying to figure out, well, what came first? Was it the hormones? No, like what you're saying is the trauma came first. The trauma came first.
110%, almost everybody I work with. And it's funny too, because a lot of them will go through their intake form and I'll ask, when did these symptoms start? And they'll say, 4 years ago. And I'm like, okay, well, what happened around that time? Oh, I was in a really bad car accident and I went through a divorce and I lost my job. And then I can see the light bulb go on and they're like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, oh, like there's a correlation. There's an emotional component, there's a trauma component to setting this stuff up. And it's fascinating because that was the one place that I never ever wanted to go to, but it's has been the place that's got the most magic.
Yeah, that's well said. Dietrich Klinghardt, who's one of my heroes, talks about how the place you have done the least amount of work is probably the place where you need to go. And a lot of people are, even if it seems like it's the physical limb that's the least amount. I know a lot of people who are very focused on their spiritual journey or their emotional work, and they actually haven't done the basics physically. And so it's usually the place we're ignoring, right? That we
Absolutely. And they all belong together. Like it all belongs together. I know that it was easier for me to start on the mental emotional journey once I started feeling better and once I started detoxing and once my hormones were back in line and working properly, because it's really, really hard to feel a certain way or to do these things if you don't have, like I said, the gas in the tank to begin with. So they all so go hand in hand, and it's part of the whole process.
Yeah, I love that holistic approach. In the Healing Grove, we talk about we're a tree of many limbs, right? We're not just the physical limb. Like you have an emotional limb, you have a spiritual limb, you have a thinking branch, you have the social branch. Like we have to connect all those things because the tree is connected to all of them, right? We can't be well without all of them. That holistic approach, so beautiful. So I'm curious to know if your courses, because I know you have a couple courses that you encourage new clients to start with. And do they get into all the branches of the tree? Like, tell us a little bit about what people can learn from on all levels in those courses.
Yeah, so I have the gut inflammation course, which is my latest course that I put out. It's just still so basics of, what causes gut inflammation, how it relates to brain inflammation. We've got so much anxiety, depression, suicide is on the rise. And, I said my uncle committed suicide. I had several attempts. My son had several attempts. So mental health is something that is, absolutely, I'm very passionate about. But the Foundations of Health course, that's like the FDN way. It's their dress for success model. It's diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, and supplementation. And I love how to point out notice that supplements are last, right? So many even functional practitioners will walk out of their office with $400 worth of supplements, but they haven't asked you if you've been pooping or what your stress level's like, or how are you sleeping at night? And if that's the case, run, because you're just going to get more sick and you're going to have really expensive pee. So it's that. And then I also put in there like a 7 video cooking series, because that's the other part that people get really confused about. They don't know how to cook. I can't get you better if you're eating processed dead food. And then there's a video on toxins, there's video on somatic experiencing work. So I teach some breath work. I have a meditation that I made to help start visualizing what it's like, right? Because, Dr. Joe Dispenza, one of the prerequisites I have with people to work with me is they all have to read Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, right? Because if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so many times people are like, when can I go back to eating? Or when can I go back to acting like? I'm like, you can't. If you want to get better and stay better, like we got to build something new. We're going this way, darling, not back that way. You have to stop looking in the rearview mirror. We're going forward. So just putting all those pieces together in one easy to follow, video series.
I love it. That's so helpful. And people really need that guidance. And it's funny, like we've really sort of gotten so far away from just how to eat properly and how to sleep properly. And like the basics are not considered basic anymore. by modern society. They're just considered throwaways. They're considered negotiable. They're not negotiable, right?
Do you know how many people I don't even have to like go forward with quote unquote treating Lyme or doing something bigger with some of these other things? Because once we get the basics in play, the body then takes over and goes, oh, I know what to do here. Like it's amazing. I've got testimonial of a one woman going, it felt like a miracle, after 3 months of just going through this the basic stuff. And it's not a miracle. It's heartbreaking is what it is, that we've gotten so far off the mark on how to live as a species that to get back to the basics seems woo-woo or, a throwaway. Like it's heartbreaking. And
Yeah. So I'm always impressed when someone like you has such a wealth of knowledge, and especially how it's sort of an uphill battle, right, in our culture to learn these things and to then push through and do them. And of course, having your own debilitating illness is very helpful in that regard, because it's sort of like hitting you over the head every moment going, yeah, you got to do this, you got to do this. Um, could you have seen yourself eating this way, thinking this way, living this way, like when you were in your 20s?
God, no. There's a line in my comedy that, back in the day, I wouldn't think twice about doing a line of Coke off another stripper's ass. But these days, if you offer me tap water in a plastic cup, my head explodes. I said the old me would have kicked the new me's ass, but the new me drives a way better car. So no, absolutely not. Back then, I was like, oh, those damn hippies, everything's gonna kill you. And these days I'm like, oh, everything's gonna kill you. Like no, I have changed so much. And thank God for this journey, because who knows where I would be if I was still that sick, broken, person that I was 10, 15 years ago. Like I tell people all the time the gifts of Lyme disease, and I get hate mail for it. Right. But it truly is. It's the blessing that brought me into this life. There are blessings to Lyme disease. There's blessings to all of us. It's happening for me, not to me. And when we can get out of that kind of victim state mentality and pick out the nuggets, what are we supposed to learn? Because no, I would be like everybody else. I would have been, convenience, eating out of convenience, burning the candle at both ends. I'd probably be dead by now. Instead, I'm living my best life ever. I mean, doing stand up, like I never in a million years thought I would be doing something like this. And I'm good at it, and I'm getting paid well to do it, and I'm getting to speak and be on stages and travel, and it's incredible.
Wow. Okay, I need to go back to the cocaine off last moment, because number one, I think you might be serious about that. And number two, like I want to, so we've never talked about stripping on this podcast. Like we're like in whole new territory now. Are you willing to go on?
Yay!
Can
So
you blame
what's funny? Can I tell you a quick funny story? So I got into stand up with another practitioner. He's on the spectrum. He's got Asperger's, and he's a chiropractor, and he does stand up, and he's in in a town over, and we met for the first time, and we're networking. And within 5 minutes of meeting him, he's like, have you ever thought about doing stand up? And I was like, why on earth would I do that? He's like, because I know you want to speak more, and it looks really good on your CV, and it gives you a whole new skill set. And I was like, oh, that kind of makes sense. And so he chased me for a little while, and I took the class that he was in. And the first class, I'm seeing everybody else show up. They have material. They've already been through the class once before. I didn't have any material. So I kind of stood back and I listened, and I noticed the theme, and the theme was trauma. And I was like, okay, I know what to do. So when it came time to my turn, I was like, I'm going to throw all my toys on the floor, and you guys tell me what you want to play with, and I was like, uncle committed suicide when I was 4. He worked in the cannabis industry. I have a transgendered son, 27 years of Lyme disease. I used to be an ex-stripper. And I kept going down the line. And of course, they picked the one thing that I was like, really? Do we have to start there? Like, I'm a practitioner. Like, I really was worried about how my reputation was going to look by putting that out there. But then at the same aspect, I'm like, if somebody is going to judge me for what I used to be, they're not a fit for me anyway. Like, I was a broken, wounded, human being. My parents I was basically raised by wolves, so I had no sense of self, no self-esteem, and now I bring it up in the comedy, just to kind of show the correlation of, adverse childhood events and, trauma and where it leads to. And, so even if one other woman can feel seen and validated in their experience because of what I went through, then it's worth it.
Hmm. Making me cry.
I'm holding back tears myself.
Well, it's powerful, to step into your truth and to own your past and to do that from a place of service is just moving. And I'm just grateful for you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So, you had spoken earlier about somatic practices. Would now be a good time for us to play around with that?
Yeah, let's bring down the nervous system a little bit, everybody. This is a combination of two. It's a VU with a push away, and I learned it from Dr. Amy Apigian. She's got the Biology of Trauma Summit, and she's just amazing. She's learned a lot. Gabrielle Mate was one of her, um, and Peter Levine was a couple of her. I just recently had a mold exposure, and I'm still losing words here and there. But yeah, a person she learned from. Um, Yes. And so the VU with the push away, if you're energetically sensitive like myself, the push away is amazing in the fact that it just kind of helps give you energetic space so that you can tune in with you again and you can breathe. When you tie that together with the VU is, humming like anything else. It helps stimulate the vagus nerve, which then helps calm the nervous system down. And so you start off by putting your hands up by your shoulders, and you're going to act like you're pushing away a boulder, and you're going to do it slow. And so you take a deep breath in, and at the same time you're pushing, you're going VU. So let's try it real quick. We'll take a deep breath in. VU. Go slower, 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 and really act like you're pushing that wall. VU. Right? You can do it to the side, you can do it to the top. My husband always knows when I'm in the grocery store, especially because I give all day. And sometimes I don't always take care of my own energy like I should. So then other people's energy is just right there on me. And I take personal things that I shouldn't. And so I'll be upset by some, rude behavior in the grocery store, which probably isn't rude. They're just probably thinking about the list they have in their head and something that their husband said to them, right? But I'm taking it as rudeness. And I'm starting to get upset. And he'll see me stand in the middle of the grocery store and do that. And he's like, "Oh, who's getting on your nerves? Which Karen is bothering you now?" And I'm like, "No." I'm like, yeah. No, I just needed to ground myself, and that simple little tool, like right there in the grocery store, 30 seconds completely changes me around to back to the heart-centered Heather, because typically I like to play with people in out in the wild, right? Um, it's been so much fun. If nothing ever comes from this comedy, it's helped me to be a more fun, playful person than I've ever been in my life. I've always been kind of a serious type A, well, Karen. I even talk about it in my, and then I say, no, I don't want to call people Karens anymore because I want to shit on women. Instead, I'm going to call it Stan, so that when they're acting up, I can say, "Shut up, Stan." But it's been, what a gift that's been. Like, I was on the airplane, and the steward guy, he said something and he messed up, and I said something sarcastic. He started laughing so hard he couldn't finish the announcement, and then I get off the plane and he gives me a big old high five, and he's like, "Thank you, I needed that laugh." And just to be able to connect with people in that way God, what a gift.
It's such a gift for others, and it's also such a gift for ourselves, right? Like, your playfulness is actually doing this to your limbic brain. Like, I love you, you're safe.
Right.
Like, your limbic brain can't feel stressed if you're having fun and being curious, right?
Absolutely.
So great. So, are you actually saying "voo" in the grocery store too? Just in case, so
Yeah.
was an out
Oh,
loud,
yeah.
you're in, they're like "vooing" in aisle 6, like it's,
Absolutely.
that.
Sometimes people will get curious and they'll ask, and then I'll teach them. Fun. Or they just look at me like I have two heads, which really I don't give a rat's ass, because like I said, at least I'm, not going to walk out of there killing somebody, running my cart up against somebody. So I do what I need to do for me, no matter how silly it looks.
So I want to go back to the beginning of the VU conversation, because you talked about being an energetically sensitive person. And I think that a lot of people listening to this may not self-identify as that, but may secretly be that. So
I don't
wonder,
call myself the empath, because I think that word, I think empath and narcissist gets thrown around way too much these days. And though there are areas in my genetics, there are genes that they can actually test for, look at and go, oh, and if you've got the variants in them, it does actually make you to be more sensitive to the world and more sensitive emotionally. I always used to get told, why you always got to make a mountain, what do they call that? A mountain out of a molehill, right? Basically I felt like I was gaslit my whole life, being told that my reactions to things were more than what they should have been, right? Always dismissing me. And that was probably one of the most freeing things when I learned that. I was like, oh, thank God, I'm validated, like, no, it's actually how I'm wired. And it doesn't have to stay that way. Like, just because something's in your genes does not mean it's the be all end all. Epigenetics is an amazing, research study out there that, it's lifestyle, all these other things that we talk about can actually determine what gets turned on and off. And, it doesn't have to be fate, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Not your destiny.
Yep.
Cool. So what are some things that energetically sensitive people might notice about themselves, other than feeling maybe like others tell them they're too much or reacting too strongly to things? Are there other sort of classic symptoms that you can give us that people can maybe be like, start thinking about this as maybe an avenue to pursue for themselves? So basically, how might someone know if they were an energetically sensitive human?
Um, for me, I was always like moved by songs on the radio. I'm easy to tears. So that could be one way, right? Another way is if you've been told a lot of times that you're dramatic or that you're oversensitive, too sensitive, too much. That could be a way. One way is also, I know I'm sensitive to EMFs. I know I'm sensitive to chemicals, definitely really sensitive to mold. So just the basic kind of world where, everyone else doesn't seem to be bothered by things, but you feel like you're dying, it's another way that you can tell if you're sensitive.
Wow. And so, I think I heard you say that like genetically there's a basis for that. And I'm wondering is it the MTHFR or there's some other things that you found in you that you're like, oh, that I can point to that makes sense of why.
That's one of them. That's one of a few. I'd have to go back through it's been a while since I looked at my DNA report, to see what those specifically are. But yeah, it was just fascinating. It felt so validating when I got that. And then I actually did a brain scan, with some neural feedback, and he said the same thing. He's like, you are ridiculously empathic, and that there's just parts of my brain that are wound a little on the tight side, which I guess, make you more sensitive. And so it's just fascinating to get it from two different places of like, oh, okay. But then again, like I said, I have been doing a lot of emotional work or a lot of this trauma work so that I can get a little bit better grip, right, of my reactions, because I kind of got sick of being the reactionary person that I had been for so long, especially anger. Anger seemed to be, I'm a hammer, everything was a nail, and that's how I treated everything, is with anger. And so I've been really working hard, to overcome a lot of those things so that, I'm not a slave to my emotions.
Yeah, it's such important work. I wonder, are you in touch with like what of those processes you've been working have been most helpful? Like as you think back about all the different tools you've learned for anger and for getting a grip on your emotions, which ones are your favorites?
Oh my gosh, the somatic work, the breath work, psychedelics, plant medicine has been a huge part in breaking through that really serious trauma. I mean, the first ayahuasca journey I went on, oh my God, be careful what you ask for. I was like, I want to heal the female lineage, and I told you I was
Oh, just
basically
the
raised
small
by
stuff.
wolves. Oh no, I thought I was going to die that night. I never heard myself cry like that before. The noises that came out of me that night, oh my gosh. But so yeah, plant work, things, vagal stimulators like the Apollo Neuro, stuff like the NIKKI, working on God, the new emotion. I'm running that right now. I can't get over how amazing it is. So there's a lot of, I think, yeah, there's a few breath work, trauma work. Yeah.
Yeah, taking on the whole female lineage, just the small
My
addition.
mother was horrible. Her mother was a nightmare, and her mother was like queen of all evil. I mean, so yeah, it was nuts that, I decided to take that on my first journey.
Well, to me, it just speaks to like what a kind of warrior you are.
Renegade.
And okay, we'll go with that one. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about something you just said. My brain just went offline after that Renegade cup. Well, tell us about Renegade. Maybe we're supposed to talk about that. Tell us about your Renegade brand.
Renegade Health Boss. So I used to be the Lyme boss, but I rebranded because I really ran into issues where because it's a disease, people think they need a doctor. And because I'm not a doctor and they don't realize all the areas that I can help them out with, I felt like I was pushing a boulder uphill for the past 2.5 years. Doctors didn't want to play with me because they didn't exactly understand what I do. But if they actually added me to their practice, especially the ones with the 6-month wait list, like all the good things that I could get the people, set up for, so that then when they are going through treatment with the doctor, like, oh my gosh, just didn't have much luck in that arena. So I rebranded the Renegade Health Boss because, I have been a renegade in my whole life and this whole experience. I've had to really think outside the box to get better and stay better. And, I like working, like I said, the Lyme, the mold, the mental health issues, the trauma, the nervous system stuff, toxins, and so I felt like it just encompassed a bigger umbrella, for me to be able to help more people.
I love it. So if people wanted to work with you, what would be a good next step for them?
First step would go to my website, Renegade, or no, it would be to go to rhbhorses.com/Grove. And that's where you would get the Foundations of Health course. Yeah, use Grove, you get $100 off. It makes the course like $79. It's really
Wow.
affordable with all that stuff I told you that's included in it. So I have everybody start there because I really need to know that you have the foundations down before we start working together, whether it's one-on-one or in a group coaching setting. But that's the place. So, and then from there, if they want to work together, I do these intake forms, like these really ridiculously in-depth intake forms, because a lot of times I can skip thousands of dollars worth of expensive labs just by using these intake forms. I mean, they're in depth, like people are like, holy cow, Heather, I wanted to kill you by the time I was done. But it was so insightful because mold overlaps and looks like Lyme overlaps, looks like this, and if you're chasing one ghost, then your people aren't going to get better. And then they get frustrated, to where I really like these because it helps me tease out, is it mold? Is it Lyme? Is it co-infections? Is it heavy metals? Is it parasites? Is it cavitations? Is it sleep apnea? Other barriers to health that people aren't really talking about or looking into as well, so that's typically kind of how I start with folks.
Awesome. So we will include a link to that in the show notes. And thank you for that $100 off for my community. So if you guys didn't hear that, if you put the word Grove as a coupon code, or maybe it's already built into the link that we'll be getting, then you get $100 off, which is a screaming deal. And the other thing I was going to say before we end is there anything else that you feel compelled to share with this audience of wellness seekers looking for holistic tools and whole person validation on all limbs of their tree before we?
I know I'm probably just preaching to the choir, but no matter how common a symptom may be, it is never normal, right? It is always your body's check engine light coming on saying, hey, dummy, there's something going on in here. Don't put a piece of tape over that check engine light. Start getting curious, start digging, looking for answers. And I'm sorry if you've already seen 30 practitioners. How are you going to help me? That 31 could be the one that has the background, the skill set. It took me 27 years, and I thank God that I continued to search and that I didn't give up, because here I am.
Yeah, amen to that. Awesome. Well, Heather Gray, thank you so much. This has been a delightful conversation, and I know people are going to get a lot out of your wisdom. Thank you for sharing it.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healing Grove podcast. If you liked it, please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you want to deepen your experience further, consider grabbing a copy of the Healing Grove Playbook. With journal prompts for this podcast and 41 others, it's the perfect place to record your learnings, keep track of the tools you explore, and reflect on your own experience. Finally, it's important to mention that even though I am a doctor, nothing you hear on this podcast, whether from myself or my guests, constitutes medical advice. Any intervention you try should always be discussed with and supervised by a trusted member of your own healing team. Thanks for listening, and see you next time in the Healing Grove.